right, well, we'll go ahead and get started this afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we are excited to present to you some information on preparing a competitive grant proposal, fiscal year 24 Adult Treatment Court Discretionary Grant Program solicitation. And we've titled this Tips and Tricks as a way to sort of highlight some strategies for those of you that might be applying for this particular solicitation. So my name is Kristen Duvall. I'm one of the co-directors of the National Treatment Court Resource Center, and I will let my other two co-presenters introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christina Lanier, the other co-director of the National Treatment Court Resource Center. Thanks for being here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carolyn Harden. I am the Chief of Training and Research with All Rise, and thank you all for being here with us today.
All right, we have a few housekeeping items before we get started. The first of which is a disclaimer. We are funded by the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and so we have this disclaimer that the opinions and information that you will be gathering from today's session do not necessarily represent the opinion of DOJ. So at the outset, that. And at the bottom, the middle of the screen at the bottom, you should see a Q&A box. So please, throughout the presentation, put any questions that you have in that Q&A box. We'll be monitoring that and we'll be answering questions at the end. So feel free to put those in throughout the presentation, but please know that we'll have plenty of time to answer your questions at the end. And also to note that the webinar is being recorded, so we will have a recording of this available that you can listen back. You can also share this with anyone from your team or anybody else who might not have been able to join us today. So with that, we'll move into an overview. So what you can expect to glean from today's presentation, we'll start with kind of an overview of, how do you read a solicitation? What are some of the things that you should make note of before you get started writing? We'll also walk through the 4 sections of a program narrative. So kind of the heart and soul of your project or your proposal is going to be that project narrative. And then we'll move on to some helpful hints about writing that and thinking creatively about your budget and how you can expend money in putting together a competitive proposal. And then again, as I mentioned, we will have time for questions at the end. So with that, for those of you that may have written a grant proposal before, you probably know what I'm talking about. But for those of you that are new, there are essentially 4 sections to a project narrative. And this is the document where you really outline what it is that the issue or the challenge that your program is facing. Then you talk about, how you're going to address that problem. Then you have your capabilities and competencies. So why your program and your team are well positioned to both manage the project and deliver that project. And then the 4th section is the plan for collecting data that's required by the funder. And so these 4 components make up that project narrative. And so we're going to walk through some tips and tricks to how do you put together a competitive project narrative. And before we kind of dive into this, one thing that we want you to keep in mind as you're thinking about all of this is we like to say that writing a grant is like telling a story. And so really thinking as you're writing and going back through and revising, are you telling a competitive or a story that a funder would be compelled to fund? And so the first slide here is really talking about before you get started, before you even start writing anything necessarily, you want to read the solicitation really carefully. So there's a lot of information there. There are even links to other documents. So we encourage folks to read through that solicitation really with a fine-tooth comb. And pay attention to who the applicant needs to be. Different solicitations require that, a particular unit of government, or it may be a nonprofit organization or something. So who does the applicant need to be? And making sure that, whoever you're representing, whoever the applicant is actually able to serve in that capacity. And that will be early on within the first couple of pages of any solicitation. And then the second thing you want to pay attention to is what the grant funds can be used to support. So you want to make sure that you're talking about in that project narrative and in your budget that you're including line items and activities that the grant funds can be used to support. Again, within the solicitation, it will have a specific section where it talks about allowable and unallowable costs. And so make sure that you're paying attention to that. So after you've read the solicitation, and when Christy and I write grants, we typically read through the solicitation 2 or 3 times. So kind of the first read through is, kind of in its whole, and then we go back through and highlight, underline, make notes to ourselves. So really make sure that you're understanding what it is that they're asking. Then the second piece, again, before you get started, is determining the issue or the need that you want to address with funding. So this should certainly be a conversation that you have with your team and other stakeholders. What is the issue that you're trying to address within your participant population, or maybe your program has a specific need. So really being strategic about that. And also during that conversation, when you're thinking about the need and the issue, will you need community partners in order to address that need? And if so, do you have a memorandum of understanding or a memorandum of agreement with those entities or individuals? Do you need letters of support from those entities or individuals? And then certainly, what evidence-based practices will you utilize? That's one thing that you'll see a theme throughout the solicitation, is really ensuring that programs are implementing evidence-based practices with participants in order to address those needs. So what evidence-based practices are appropriate for the need that you're addressing? And then thirdly, what program elements will be supported with these funds? So if you're thinking about, you want to increase treatment among participants, then what treatment modalities? That would certainly be one. If you want to address drug testing and increase the frequency of that. If you want to bring on, another recovery support service, what do you need? So really thinking through, and Carolyn's going to talk a lot about how you can think, again, creatively around addressing program elements and really increasing your program's capacity to serve participants and address their needs. So those 3 items before you get started. Then, once you've kind of answered those 3 questions and really have some information, we encourage you to create an outline of the solicitation. And so this is really kind of exactly what it says. It's a bullet list of all of the things that you need to address within your both project narrative, but also the attachments that you need. In what format does that need to be in? All the way down to font size, margins, and the like. So really a comprehensive outline of that solicitation. Then you can think about also paying attention to the dollar amount. So what is the ceiling? What's the maximum that the funder will allow? And the length of the grant period. So is this a 3-year grant? Is it a 4-year grant? But one thing that we want to point out is that you do not always have to ask for the maximum dollar amount. So thinking about what is it that you need, what dollar amount. You obviously cannot go over the maximum, but you certainly, if you don't need $500,000, you only need $400,000, that's okay. You're still eligible to apply, and really making sure that you're justifying the costs that you're including in that budget. And the dollar amount should be listed on both on the cover, but also within the first probably section of the solicitation. That information will be outlined there. And then finally, creating a to-do list of the documents that you need. So again, going back to who are those community partners that you might be utilizing within this project. Do you need letters of support or other supporting documents from them? One thing that's always helpful is in that to-do list, you assign people specific tasks. So maybe you have someone who is responsible for circulating the MOU, or you have another person who's responsible for organizing all of the letters of support. Being organized throughout the process is, I swear, a quarter of the battle. So designating, people with specific tasks, and then one person to sort of coordinate as that memorandum of understanding comes back, as those letters of support come in. What have you completed? You can cross off specific items on that to-do list, so you know where you are and what you still need to complete before you submit your application materials. That can be really helpful to the overall process and just staying on top of where you are. So once you've kind of completed all of those things, you can start thinking about the project narrative. And again, as I mentioned, there are 4 sections to the project narrative, and this is really the heart and soul of your application. So again, thinking about this, are you telling a story throughout? And the first item that someone is going to read, a reviewer, is the description of the issue. And so this is, again, where you state what is the issue or the area of need that your team has identified as in need of funding to support. And so we like to say, think about this in terms of making a concise, a clear, and convincing case. And so you're talking about the challenges that need to be addressed, the potential benefits to those needs and those challenges being addressed. So kind of what's the payoff? Why will this be helpful to participants? Why will this be helpful to the program? And again, ensuring that you're utilizing data in order to make that case. So oftentimes in some solicitations, they will say, specific data sets that you need to, or data that you need to cite. Others leave it a little bit more open. And so we encourage applicants to utilize substance use data, local arrest data, if you can get it, US Census data, if you need to talk about the population of focus or your community, describing the community where your program is located and the folks that you're serving. If you're a family court or a juvenile court, the Annie E. Casey Foundation Kids Count data has a lot of information that's related to the juvenile and family treatment court population. So that's a good data source to utilize. And then certainly if you're a veterans court or you serve veterans in your programs, the Veterans Reentry Search Service, so the VRSS, and the SQUARES, or the Status Query and Response Exchange System, are good data sources, again, to incorporate into your description of the issue. You're stating what the issue is, and here's some data that we can use to substantiate this need that exists. Also within the description of the issue, you're going to cite literature or research that supports what it is that you're saying. So if, for example, housing is an issue in your community and among your target population, you could utilize some literature to talk about the role of housing in the needs of folks in treatment courts and within the criminal justice system at large. So really tying that literature to supporting what it is that you're saying that need is among your population. So we have 2 sources of information here. We know sometimes that can be a little challenging to get your hands on research and literature, but the NTCRC, we have a publications page and a research page on our website. And so you can see some of that information. Also, Google Scholar is a great resource as well. And so you can, again, put in keywords and search for new articles or monographs that can be utilized to support what it is that you're saying. So those are 2 resources we would encourage you to check out. So some tips for the description of the issue. Remember kind of 4 things. 1 is you're justifying the need or the problem that you've identified as a team with data. So making sure that you're including data in your discussion. So cite your sources. So making sure that you're saying where it is that you got that information. Some solicitations actually even require that you cite. But it's just good practice to do that. Also, whenever possible, utilize your own program data. So if you have an evaluator or a research partner that you're working with, ask that individual if they can provide you with some data over the last year or several years to demonstrate that. We say when possible because we recognize that not all programs have data that they need. And so if you don't have local program data, certainly going to some of those other data sources for information to, again, justify the need. And then fourth, making sure that your data connects to the issue. So again, the data that you're citing, making sure that that's connected to that issue or that need. And again, making the convincing case that a reviewer should continue reading your application and onto the project design and implementation section where you're going to talk about in detail the plan that you have come up with for addressing this particular need that you've outlined in section A. And so I'm going to turn it over to Christy to talk about project design and implementation.
Thanks, Kristen. So the project design and implementation, one thing that I want to mention is we are using headings for each of these sections from the BJA Adult Treatment Court grant solicitation. But these headings might be a little bit different if you're using OJJDP or a SAMHSA application, but what's contained within each section is very similar. So just so you kind of see that we're just using this as an example, there are other headings for these sections in other funders. So the project design and implementation, this is going to be the bulk of your project narrative. When we look at project narratives, each section is weighted a percentage. So each section has a percent that it is contributing to your overall application. This varies again across funding agencies, but the project design and implementation will always be the one that has the most weight or the highest percentage. And that's because this is where you are telling the reviewer, this is what we are going to do to address that issue that we just described to you in section A. You're going to be very clear in this section, making sure that there's no question asked from the reviewer, so they know exactly what your program is doing and how it operates, how it functions, who the staff people are, how a participant enrolls in your program, how a participant moves through your program, and whatever services you're looking to possibly, maybe you're going to expand your treatment court. As the example Kristen used with treatment, you're going to expand treatment. So you're going to talk about how you're going to expand treatment in this project design and implementation. So just a few little tips around project design and implementation. All solicitations will have some sort of goals or a mission, objectives. You want to link your project to those solicitation goals and objectives. So in other words, somewhere in the solicitation, you should be talking about the overarching goal of that program. So for the adult treatment court program, if you go to that request for funding or request for proposal, you'll see there's a section that says the goal of this program is, and there's a whole list of objectives, a goal, and then a whole list of objectives related to that, what they call funding program. So you want to be sure that what you're doing relates to those solicitation goals. There's some also have a mission, and so perhaps you want to relate it to the mission of the funding agency. As part of that process, or as part of the project design and implementation, you might also be required, and in the BJA application, you are required to include and address All Rise's best practice standards. So for example, in the ATC solicitation, if you are implementing a new program, you must address all 10 best practice standards. You must indicate where you are addressing those in the abstract. If you're enhancing a program, you need to identify what best practice standards are related to the enhancement. And then similarly in the abstract, put the page numbers, which we'll talk about the abstract last, because that's usually when we write it, is after we've written everything else. You're probably aware that there are other guiding principles, essential elements, etc., that relate to other types of treatment courts. You may be required, again, depending on the funding agency, to talk about these. Integrating these into your application really demonstrates that you have a grasp of the model itself, regardless of the treatment court type or recovery court that you are working with. So you want to make sure that these elements are a part of your application. Again, tying it always back to that statement of need or the statement of the issue. Couple of other things. As I just mentioned, we want to be really clear about what we're proposing to do. Whenever Kristen and I do this presentation, we do it every now and then for states. We do webinars around grant writing. We always say, learn from our mistakes. And so we've been doing grant writing for, let's not tell anyone how long, but for a long, long, long time. And we've made mistakes, obviously. So when we've gotten reviews back from reviewers where perhaps something wasn't funded, one of the things that sometimes comes up is exactly this. There was some element of the program design that wasn't clear. There wasn't a linkage. They weren't sure what probation was doing as part of this program, let's say. So we want to be really clear on what you're proposing to do. Yes, there are page limits. Sometimes it's 10 pages for SAMHSA, 20 pages for BJA, double spaced, all that's in the solicitation. But what Kristen and I generally do is we just write. We write, and then we go back and cut. So you might be thinking to yourself, how in the world am I going to get all of that information into 10 pages or into 20 pages? Well, you're not. You're not going to get all of that information. But what you're going to do is strategically make sure that this is linking to the statement of the issue and that again, it's clear to the reviewer exactly what's going on with your program. Now, the second bullet might be sort of, logical, but you want to make sure that what you're doing is realistic, logical, and feasible. And by that, what we mean is if, for example, you're looking to hire a case manager, let's say, but you're saying that case manager is going to serve 300 participants. That's going to be their average caseload. Obviously, that's not realistic, logical, or feasible. So yes, that's an extreme example, but that's what we're talking about. You want to make sure that the individuals or the program components, whatever you're doing for your program design and implementation, can actually is something that can actually be done. Okay, so if you're looking to perhaps you're trying to add mobile drug testing to your program. Okay, that's great. You need to demonstrate the need in section A. And then in this section, you need to be very specific about how you're going to implement that mobile drug testing. You need to be sure that, again, how are you going to get to those people? Okay, maybe you need a car or a van or something like that. Be very clear who's going to do the mobile drug testing. How often is it going to happen? How participants be notified about the mobile drug testing? So all of those sorts of things are very clear and make sure that they make sense for them to come together. Now, this is a truncated version of this presentation. It's usually just this part is usually 2 hours or 3 hours long. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A should we not cover something that you're interested in knowing. So the project design and implementation, again, the heaviest weight when it comes to the solicitations. You're going to hear us say this on every tips page. Answer the bullet or the headings in the order that they appear. So if you've ever looked at a solicitation, there'll be project design and implementation. Under that section, there'll be bullet points with what you're supposed to answer. When Kristen and I write a grant, we literally cut and paste those bullet points into a Word document. And we answer each of those bullet points as they appear and in the order that they appear. We have actually spoken to reviewers and they saw us do this presentation. And when we said this, the reviewers were just giddy because they were like, yes, if everybody did this, our lives would be so much easier. Okay. So you want to make sure that you're answering it in the order that they appear. Of course, you'll take the bullet out when you finalize your copy, but this is the one way that you can make sure that you're answering everything. Yes, you're going to answer something, and then 4 bullets later, you're going to answer something that seems like you just answered it. Learn from our mistakes. Kristen and I, when we were novice grant writers, thought, well, if 1 and 4 are similar, we can just kind of combine those two into one answer. Nope. Answer them in the order that they appear. So even if you think, oh, well, we just said that, say it again. Okay. And it is repetitive at times, but you want to make sure that you're covering all of those bullets. Relatedly, on the NTCRC website, we have project narratives with all of the bullets by category for the 2024 fiscal year Adult Treatment Court Discretionary Grant Program project narrative. So we can go to our website. There's a Word document that looks exactly what Kristen and I do. You can download that Word document. All your bullet points are there. So if you're applying for a new program, so your category 1, all the questions you need to answer for category 1 are in that Word document. So we've already done this part for you. That is a free resource. Please go use it. I promise you it will make your life much easier if you have all those in the order. When you're talking about best practice standards, this isn't necessarily a requirement always, but this is something that we do in this particular solicitation because you have to address the best practice standards. We bold them in the narrative. So for example, if we're addressing best practice standard 1, excuse me, in the parentheses right next to wherever we've just talked about it, we'll put best practice standard 1 or BPS 1. And we'll bold that so that the reviewers know that, oh, this is where they're talking about best practice 1, best practice standard 1. And so it's easy for them to find. Again, the reviewers that saw us talk about this thought this was great also, said, oh my gosh, that would make it so much easier. We can actually find that because it is a requirement. And then lastly, within this section, similar to the project design and, the statement of the issue, where yes, we want to talk about the issue and have some literature to support that. In this section, you're going to talk about your evidence-based practices that you're using, and you'll need to ensure that you justify the use of those evidence-based practices with research and literature. What does that mean? It means if you're using a particular treatment modality, you have to demonstrate that that treatment modality is for your target population. So if you're using MRT, you can go find some research or literature on MRT and put that in there. We know MRT is for for the treatment court population for the most part. So we want to, make sure that it's the individual, around criminal thinking and those type of things. So if you're talking about criminal thinking, how are you going to know about criminal thinking from the person? So see, you got to tie that all together. What assessment are you doing to figure out if that is an area of need? And then what are you doing to address that area of need? We're adding MRT. Okay. So you got to tie all that together. So that's project design and implementation. Again, really the heart or the meat of your project narrative. So you want to spend the most time on this section, I would say. I think all sections are important, but you might spend a little bit more time on this section. And when you write these sections, get somebody else to read it for you. Get somebody that perhaps isn't familiar with your program, because remember I said you want to make sure that you cover everything. So if somebody reads it and they say, I have no idea why you're using fill in the blank. Oh, okay, well, I need to go back and fill that in as to why I'm using that. So those are the first 2 sections. So this is how we think about it. You've talked about your issue or your need. This section is how we're going to do it. The third section is the who is going to do it. So the third section is capabilities and competencies. Capabilities and competencies is really important for demonstrating, as it says here, the skills and expertise related to the project or the program. In some solicitations, there will be a requirement that you have a project director for a particular FTE, so 0.5 FTE or something like that. Pay attention to those details, okay? Because if you need to have that project director at 0.5 FTE, that's got to be in your budget. That's got to be in your capabilities and competencies. So what's included most often in this area is the credentials of your team members. So you're demonstrating the competencies of the individuals who will be working with or on your program or on your team. In addition, you're going to talk about partners that you might be working with. So your treatment partners, what's your history with those partners? If you have housing partners, you're going to talk about those. Kristen and I work with a local program here. They have about 10 housing partners. So when you think about, oh my goodness, how are we going to talk about 10 housing partners? Well, very easily, we bold the name of the housing partner. We write maybe one sentence about that housing partner. And then obviously there's a letter of support from that housing partner. And so that's how we kind of fit all of that in. You're going to talk about training that your team members have done. So have they done some of the trainings that All Rise offers? And then what experience do they have working with the target population? You want to be sure that you talk about that as well. There's also a section usually that talks about the ability of your fiscal agent or whoever's going to be doing the money part, that they have experience managing large grants. So if the county is applying, which is often the case in these types of solicitations, the county, what is their experience fiscally? What is their fiscal experience with managing these large grants? And then how does that play into your treatment court and what you're doing? You want to talk about the roles and responsibilities of all key personnel. Generally speaking, if a person is in your personnel lines in your budget, you need to talk about them in the capabilities and competencies. Those key personnel need to be talked about. If you have a half-time treatment provider that works for your that's going to be paid directly from your grant, you need to talk about that person and their role and responsibility as part of the project. If you have individuals who are offering in kind, you might talk about that as well. So you want to make sure that all key personnel are discussed in this section. And then we mentioned MOUs and needing those. You want to make sure that you start these early in the process. A team member MOU is required. And then, as I mentioned, again, this is where the fiscal agent comes into play. You may have to have an MOU for that as well. Lastly, you may have to attach job descriptions or resumes, but you're good because you've already created that to-do list with all of the attachments that you need for this solicitation. That to-do list is really going to help you to keep all this organized, I promise. Again, learn from our mistakes. I promise you, if you have that to-do list, because remember, in that to-do list, you're going to assign roles and responsibilities. So Kristen and I, as external grant writers for programs, there's only so much that we can do. We can't get agency documents and that type of thing. So we make sure that the agency knows, hey, you have to get these things. You have to make sure that you fill out the fiscal responsibility attachment. So making sure that you have, who is responsible for what, okay? So again, tips around capabilities and competencies. I told you we were going to say it again. Answer the bullets in the order that they appear, that they are presented. We've already done that for you on that document that's on our website. Please feel free to take advantage of that. And then pay attention to the needed attachments, especially with SAMHSA grants, just because there's one out there, we'll mention that. There's, I think, 12 attachments or something to that extent. So you want to make sure that you have all of those attachments. You want to make sure that you've covered your bases. Again, just practical, what we do. There's a couple of attachments that might say optional or may not be applicable. There's a couple, generally speaking, we usually attach those anyway and just say not applicable. Again, we're just about covering our bases so that it doesn't get kicked back to us. So that is capabilities and competencies. So we've done 3 sections. What are we going to address? How are we going to address it? Who's going to address it? And then the last section is the plan for data collection. So the last section is how are we going to know if we did it? Okay. So we've taken all of that information. Now we're going to figure out, did we do what we said we were going to do, and how well did we do it? All solicitations are going to have required performance measures. They're going to be called different things. It's a PMT, performance measuring tool with BJA. If you have experience with SAMHSA, it's the GIPRA. So they're all different. Each solicitation is going to have a link to these performance measurement tools. You can see we've just put the page numbers here for the ones that are active right now. Make sure you review those. Now, it's always important, and it says this in the solicitation, you are not required to submit data for this section. You just have to demonstrate that you have the ability to submit and collect, to collect and submit the required performance measures. So that's the part that they're asking you to do, okay? Some questions to consider in this section. You're gonna really talk about the process and the plan. Again, learn from our mistakes. We had a program that there were a number of people involved in the data collection, a number of agencies contributing data. And one of the reviewers said, it's not clear the role of each entity in the data collection process. So we were not clear. We were not concise. We didn't demonstrate exactly everyone's role in the data collection process. So some things to think about. How are you going to store this data? Do you have a HIPAA compliant online database? Who's going to collect it? When is it going to be collected? Who's going to review it? When do stakeholders get to see it? All of those sorts of things. So you want to make sure that you're very clear on how you're going to collect this performance measure data. And again, whichever one you need to collect based on the solicitation. Very important to make sure that that's clear. Lastly, regardless of the solicitation, you will have to submit some sort of a timeline. The timeline is going to have objectives, deliverables, goals, and usually who's responsible for those. So this is a little bit different, again, depending on the solicitation. For BJA, this is a web-based form. So you just literally upload it. If you know the grant system is called Just Grants that you submit to. So you just submit that through a web-based form. You fill it out right there online. For SAMHSA, it's an attachment. The timeline is an attachment. So just make sure you know which one you need to do. But what's important about the timeline really goes back to that, what we talked about being logical, feasible, etc. So making sure that that timeline is reflected in not only, if you have a planning period, many grants now have a 6-month planning period. You don't necessarily have to take all 6 months, but there's a planning period. So when you set out that timeline, what does that look like with the planning period? As Kristen mentioned, know how long the grant is. How many months is the grant? So again, making sure that timeline is reflected there. Couple of tips for this. Again, answer the bullet points in the order they are received. They are presented, excuse me. Make sure you're very specific on that plan to collect the data and who is going to do it. That's really important as well. Make sure that the data you need is available before funding is received. So if there's something you're not collecting right now, but you look at that performance measurement tool and you say, oh my goodness, we need to collect that. Make sure that it's available. Make sure you have a plan in place to be able to collect that. And then clearly state, literally a sentence, that the project can and will collect the required performance measurement data. That is a required statement in most solicitations, okay? So those are the 4 components of the program narrative or project narrative. You're going to talk about the issue, how you're going to address the issue, who's going to address the issue, and then find out if we did address the issue and were we successful in addressing that issue with data. There's one other section or one other component that's important, and that is the abstract. An abstract, it's just like if you read a journal article or anything like that, it's an overview of the project. Every abstract has very specific information that needs to be included. You'll find this in the request for proposal. There'll be a section on the abstract. There will be a word limit. And that is important. This is definitely one of those sections where we kind of write and then go back and cut, because sometimes there's a lot of information that they want in the abstract. So you need to make sure that you're including all of that information. We write this last because it's an overview of the project. So we need to write all the other sections, and then we can write the abstract and fill in the blank of all that information that's needed from what we just wrote. Okay, so the abstract is important. I'll tell you why in just a minute. Be sure to address each bullet point. Very important in the abstract. The reason why it's so important is because the abstract is the first thing the reviewer will read. And it may be the thing that determines whether or not they continue reading. Okay, that's really important. Ensure that what's in the abstract is the same as the project narrative. Again, this might be one of those, well, yeah, of course, but who knows? If you've written that project narrative, maybe finance sends you an adjusted budget amount, or finance sends you an adjusted number of participants. You go into the project narrative, you change it, but you don't change it in the abstract. So you want to make sure that those two things match, the number of participants and the total. If it asks for the total budget amount in the abstract, which some do, you want to make sure that those numbers match what's in the budget that you are submitting. And then I mentioned this previously, if required, the page numbers where you discuss the specific best practice standards addressed within your project narrative, you want to make sure that those are in there as well. Okay. Now, unfortunately, I think we have this twice, so. Oh, sorry, maybe a web-based form or an attachment. Yeah, sorry. It could be a web-based form. So for Just Grants for BJA, it's a web-based form. One of the things, again, kind of practical recommendation, save everything you do in a Word file. Just Grants doesn't automatically save, and you have to hit save. So you want to put everything in a Word file that has to be placed in a web-based form, because it would be drastic if you lost all that work and then couldn't retrieve it. So make sure you do that. All right, so real quick, and a summary of all the things we said. Yes, there are places of repetition. Say it again, okay? Even though you may have already said it. As Kristen talked about, tell your story. Tell your story. Talk about what is important in your community and how you're going to address it. Start early, outline everything that you can. Make sure that you have a to-do list. Answer all the bullet points in the order that they are, appear. There's always an application checklist at the end of solicitations. Use that because it's going to list, especially those attachments that you need. It's going to be listed there, and you can go through, make sure those are on your to-do list, and then check those off. You may also have priority areas that are addressed within the request for proposal. So you can look at that in the treatment core, BJA treatment core. There are a couple of areas of priority areas. And then some other things that are important, the research and evaluation independence statement. There's some disclosures and assurances. These are just examples of other attachments that you might have to include. And again, using data to support the need for funding, the evidence-based practices, et cetera. And really make sure that you start early, especially with MOUs and MOAs, if there's a number of people that need to sign that and you have to go around to each person and have them sign it, make sure that that's clear, clear who needs to sign it and when they need to sign it by. And I know it seems logical again, but just organization, as Kristen said, is the key to writing a grant. Oftentimes, as is probably the case for you, there's multiple people that are involved in the grant writing process within your program or your agency. So you want to make sure that everybody that needs to be involved is there, and perhaps people that don't need to be involved perhaps aren't there. Okay, so keep that in mind. So that is a summary of the project narrative. And hopefully you gain something. I know that was really quick, but hopefully you gain something from the project narrative. Now we're going to turn it over to Carolyn, and she's going to talk a little bit about thinking outside of the box. So what do you need infrastructure? Carolyn?
Thank you all. So now that you've stayed here with us and heard all this great information about what you need to do in writing and preparation, I want you to think about your infrastructure. What do I need to get this program going so that we can continue to do this work even after this grant ends? So let's start there. So there are some allowable uses of the funds that you can do this, use this money for. Starting a drug court, maintaining a program, expanding your program, increasing who you're taking, adding different components to your program, enhancing your court operations. If there are things like someone asked in the comments, hey, we got these updates to the standards. Well, with those updates to the standards, this is an opportunity for you to apply for funding to make modifications or to enhance your program based on those updates that just came out. So let's talk about standard 1. In the target population, one of the things that we noticed a lot is that a number of teams don't have a risk assessment tool or clinical assessment tools that allow them to determine if they're taking the right population. So the one thing that you may want to do with your funds is to put in to purchase a risk assessment tool. You got to have a validated tool. Whatever you do, do not buy a paper tool. You need to get the latest risk assessment tools are electronic. You want to get the electronic model. You want to be able to do that. But more importantly, you want to have your staff trained. Not just the people who are going to implement it, but you need to have a supervisor trained to ensure that whatever tools that you are using, whether it's your risk assessment or your clinical assessment, that those people, that the supervisors are trained in it, that can oversee and ensure that there is fidelity to whatever tool that you're planning to use. The other thing you may want to think about, let's say you already have a tool. Is this tool validated with the population that we serve? Then you might want to write into your proposal to work with an evaluator to come in and start evaluating that tool within your community so that you have a validated tool with your own target population. If people need to go to training, don't forget that. Is it annual training? Is it one time? How many staff need to go? Do they need to travel? Are you going to bring the people in to do the training? Look at those costs, because then you're talking about travel, lodging, airfare. What does that look like? So that you can write those costs in, not just for your risk assessment, but for your clinical assessment. Even expanding, if you have new people who are coming on, you always need to have backup people trained to actually do your tools and to be able to move forward in case somebody's out sick, something happens. So that's just something you want to remember with your tools. The next thing I want you to think about is some of you all are moving to expand, to create different tracks. So you may want to create a different track in your existing court. So if I want to do that, then I've got to think about what does that mean for me to have that existing track. You can write into the BJA grant to do multiple tracks, to do a DWI. Even now we know that we have a lot of issues coming in that we may want to address male and female and develop gender-specific tracks. We also may want to develop a different track to deal with our low-risk but high-need folks, or our high-risk, low-need folks, that we may need to develop services or programming to address them, especially in those communities where I don't have other criminal justice programs. That may be something I want to look at. Specific to you, if you're doing this as a veteran treatment court, one of the things that you want to think about is really looking at population being able to identify. So if we could go to the next slide. One of the things you want to do is partner with your jail, your probation, or other agency to run your VRSS and squares. So when you say that, it's free to use those tools, but it takes staffing time. So they may need to hire someone or pay someone overtime to actually run that report in the jail. You can write that into these programs. You also, many veteran treatment courts have an influx of people that they're serving who were in their programs because they were driving while impaired. Well, do you have the actual right risk assessment tool to determine risk level for DWI folks who are coming into your program? Do you have training to work with that population? Is there other treatment, other modalities or things that you need to bring to the table? Are you going to be doing a standalone veterans treatment court or adding a track? If so, do you need to attend training for that? And you have to think about that. If we're going to be going or having training brought in, but we have outside counselors or someone else that we need to cover their time, you might want to write that in. When we're looking at our veteran treatment courts, a number of those programs also start separate tracks. You can write that into the proposal to be able to cover the cost for those separate tracks. So let's move to standard 2. When we talk about the equity and inclusion standard, a lot of information. If you look at the new updated standards, it wants to know, are you collecting data? Do you guys have a tool that allows you to collect the data and not just collect it, be able to get information out of your database system? Also, can you build in ongoing training? One of the things that the standard says is that you should have ongoing training, especially on cultural diversity, equity, doing those things in your community. This may be an opportunity for you to partner with members in your local community, like the Urban League, the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People. You may also look at your local colleges and universities that have DEI programs to build with them to develop ongoing training, not just for your treatment court. Think about opening it up for your entire courthouse, your entire community, so that you all can address some of the concerns of your underserved populations. This is an opportunity to create an advisory board of your underserved communities. And just opposed to asking people to sit on a board, but writing in, if you're doing in-person meetings, to cover mileage for those folks to attend those meetings, you know, to really be a voice to help give back, to help them be a part of assisting you all with figuring out not just the needs of your folks who are coming in your program, but are there satellite offices that we need to put in those communities so folks can come to probation at a satellite office? Is there an opportunity for treatment to have a satellite office in that community? It's an opportunity to partner with our civil legal assistants. The BJA grants allow for you to write this in, to partner with those free legal assistants to provide low and middle income with civil and legal problems. So many of our clients come in, have civil issues that have stacked up, that when we're talking about getting them into a lifestyle of recovery, they've got to address all those issues as well that are non-criminal, but may be barriers to assisting them with the changes that they need to make. So this may be an opportunity for us to partner with those agencies to bring that to bear. The next thing that we want to look at is providing some work with our LGBT community or other special populations that may exist in your community. Again, one of the great words when you are writing a grant is called collaboration. Are there other community partners that we can collaborate with for them to work with us to train us, to provide services, to provide resources, and you can write those in to your grant to cover those costs. We're seeing a lot of programs that are implementing HEAT and HER. We give you the link to that, but you can actually get training, bring that training to your community, to your providers, so that you all are getting trained in that, how to implement it. If you live in a community with a lot of Native populations, you may even reach out to the local tribe to develop a partnership to include that into your grant proposals, those costs, translation of your materials into the language that meets the needs of your community. One of the things in the new updated standards talks about being proactive recruitment in your underserved communities. Do you need to do posters? Do you need to do brochures? Do you want to create a marketing video? Something you could have at the bus stop, something you could have playing at the jail. Do you have a local TV station that you can do some advertising about the benefits of your program? It's also an opportunity for you to partner with local and state veteran organizations. This may be an opportunity to work with them to actually get in a diverse group of mentors to come in and work with your programs. So looking at different populations, men, women, Black, Indigenous people of color, really doing some reach out so that you're able to meet the diverse needs that you see coming through your program. The next thing we could think about too is for the standard on incentive sanctions and service adjustments. Service adjustments is a new thing that we've talked about in the standards. That do you have curriculums? Do you have programming that you may need to invest in now to actually make those service adjustments that really creating life skill classes, new curriculums? A lot of programs have used curriculums that may not be trauma informed or to meet the diverse needs of the population that we are seeing. So for example, a number of communities are changing their treatment. They're seeing a younger group. And so they're maybe using now CBT, MET5 because their population is that 21 to about 34-year-old population where they're doing a different curriculum that was created for a younger population to really help do engagement with that population and being trained in it. So this is an opportunity to think about, do we have access to some of those materials? What are they? Do we want to upgrade and update to bring those to bear to our program? The next thing we want to look at is looking at our substance use, mental health, trauma treatment, and recovery management. If you're working with non-VA eligible individuals, contracting with your local treatment providers, what if those providers have not been trained in some of the very things like the VA offers for mental health or some of the treatment? You could pay for those local providers to go and get that training, that some of that same training in EMDR or other specialized trainings that work for that veteran population. You could actually write that in for your local community providers to get that training to make it available for the folks who are in your community. If your providers aren't using manualized treatment, or again, have not updated their curriculums in years to look at some of the new things that are available, some of the new resources that are out there, this is an opportunity to pay for that, to say, let's go get trained in this. Let's look at some different modalities to add, because people don't use drugs. They don't interact with drugs the same way that they did 20, 30 years ago. And we need to update our processes. Are you able to offer primary and behavioral health care? So working with physicians, getting them to be a part of your processes, identifying different people to come in and work. Are you able to get registered nurses to be a part of your process? So this way we are ensuring that our clients have access to medical services and to medication-assisted treatment. Do we have new team members that need to be trained? This, again, is a way for us to bring that in. And especially as we start to talk about recovery management and some of those different things as we move to how do you access healthcare coverage? So these are services, if you can go to the next slide, that talk about how do we do this? We can look at healthcare insurance enrollment process. So I can work with companies, work with different agencies, hire peer recovery support, or work with my treatment agency to give them money to hire peer recovery or recovery support specialists, pay for them to get training that they need to assist us, to offer groups in continuing care, staffing time. I can cover that, purchasing materials, recovery management, using a lot of programs are now using apps and different technology to reach out to their graduates, even paying for some of our graduates and alumni to become recovery support specialists, building that in so there's transition and help for folks to move into these different roles that we want them to help us facilitate with the next folks coming through. So one thing that we then go to is our complementary services and recovery capital standard, where we begin to talk about all of those other criminogenic needs, restorative needs, developing a continuing care, working with our community partners to actually put in money so that they have services and space available to meet the needs of our clients. So let's talk about criminogenic needs. Do you have criminal thinking program? One thing we cannot forget is that if we're taking high-risk folks, they come in and they have criminal behavior. We have to build into our programming programs that help us to address that criminal thinking component. And we can't just hope it goes away. We've got to have programs. So this is just a list of some, but think about those criminogenic needs. Do you have manualized programming? A lot of probation departments are doing this, or have case managers that are trained to do this using Epics, Epics 2, Soaring, different programs that they are sending their staff to be trained in to really work on that therapeutic relationship with the participant, but also being trained in some of these programs. The University of Cincinnati has a ton of them that are able to help address those criminogenic needs, which are programming we can offer to them in phase 3, the latter phases of our program, especially after they become clinically stable. The next one we want to talk about is some of that education counseling. You know, instead of just telling folks to get a job, many of our clients might benefit from going to vocational training or going back to school. It may be incumbent upon us to find out from our colleges, our universities, is there a cost for educational counseling? And if so, build that into your grants to pay for that. Some programs even cover the cost for aptitude and achievement testing to help folks figure out life goals or where they want to go. Do they need to take the GED preparation programming? Does your program need to pay for some courses or some of that, or to work with a community partner who has that, for them to have time to come in and offer classes for your clients? Is there college preparation that we can do to help some of those folks get over the hump of what they need to do to be able to go to college? You can build in money to cover those costs in those grants. Even if you have clients who want to apply to go to college, I can put in money to help with those application costs and those academic costs. So those are things to think about, especially in those maintenance needs. Transportation is a big one. Is there an opportunity to partner with a local agency with a van to pay them to provide transportation services? Can you buy bus passes? Can you work with some of our local churches, have buses? You know, is it an opportunity to pay for their insurance for people to come by and to do different things? Employment assistance. There's an opportunity to reimburse the local health agency to get full medical assessments to include HIV and hepatitis. How many of our clients need some of those medical issues to be addressed, again, to help them with long-term recovery? So those are things that you can look at based on the needs of your clients and what is the industry in your local community. Don't forget the mental health needs. The cost for mental health assessments. I saw one of the questions about, can we use this to pay for DV counselors? Yeah, you can. If that's an issue for clients that are coming in, that they were victims or might have been perpetrators, I want to get counselors trained to address that using some of the trauma-informed focused treatments like Seeking Safety, DBT. Yes, I want to write those things in, ensuring that our staff get trained, Working with our police departments, our other folks who have crisis intervention teams, that is also another way to reach out to get law enforcement to be a part of your team, is reaching out to your CIT officers, potentially putting in money to cover the cost for your law enforcement overtime team to go out and do home visits, to work with you, to process warrants. Those are all things that you can write in. Other things you want to think about is naloxone distribution. A number of the things that we can do to address overdoses in our community, working with other community partners, putting in money to pay for that, to give out naloxone, to do education. And one thing I want to encourage you to do is think about family engagement. Many of our folks come to us, they have spouses, they have kids. Is there an opportunity? And the answer is yes, to write into your proposals to do family counseling, to do family development programming, to do childcare. If a client has to be in group in the evening, or there's going to be group takes where clients' kids are getting out of school and the kids may need to go to an aftercare program while their parent is in group, you can write that in to cover those costs, so that while the clients are in treatment, their kids are in that aftercare programming or in daycare, so that they can get the treatment that they need. You also want to think about getting with your local agencies for rent programs and different things to build those linkages. Also, don't forget about your alumni. Write in to support their activities, printing materials, copy editing materials, creating a marketing video that helps them attract other folks, covering the cost for your alumni members to potentially go to your state conference and the national conference. There's the National Treatment Court Alumni Association. You may even want to put in money to take at least your officers of your alumni or somebody from your alumni to the national conference. Working on your handbooks and your materials so that they are in the language, they're friendly, they look good, they have pictures, they have different things. Your forms that you're giving clients are online, so that we can move into this century so that clients can use their phones to actually collaborate with us and get things done in a much easier way. Other things to think about too is drug and alcohol testing. When we look at that, do you need more supplies, more test cups? Do you need to cover the cost for some of this? Is there opportunity? A lot of programs are using phones where people can put their breathalyzers on it. So again, to have these safe mechanisms. During the pandemic, we learned so much about masks, face shields, plastic dividers, gowns. Do you still need to order that equipment? The answer is yes. Do you need to work with your community partners to have satellite offices? Are there colleges and universities that do drug testing that you may be able to work with them to expand your drug testing, to work with your law enforcement to expand your drug testing out in the weekends? If you don't have a random call-in number, is this an opportunity to write those things in for more test cups using your electronic devices like GPS? Those are different things that you can write into this proposal. The other thing I want to talk about is your team. So the next thing that you can do is to really put in for your team to go to state conferences, the national conference. If you there's a tribal enhancement conference that's done each year. All Rise offers different discipline-specific trainings. This year, we're doing community supervision, prosecutors, and coordinators. And then we switch it around. Are there opportunities for you to send folks to go? And if you're doing it, don't forget airfare, ground transportation, meals, the registration costs, the lodging. Are there other continuing education courses that people need to go to? The other thing that I encourage you all to do, put in money for a team retreat that is not at the courthouse, that you get to go off site. Y'all spend some time looking at your policies, doing that. Do you need to add a physician, a nurse? Is this an opportunity to cover some of their costs? Do you need to add a mental health provider? Do you also want to look at navigators, different folks who can help people figure out how to get health insurance and those things to navigate some of those in your community? If you're doing a veterans treatment court, this might be an opportunity to hire a full-time mentor coordinator that does the recruiting of mentors. You may even want to put in money to pay for your mentors to participate in a boot camp, or to put in money to have a boot camp brought to your local community, to update electronic mentor materials, send them off to different trainings, printing materials, pay mileage for your mentors to go back and forth and work with your clients. This is something you also could write in with your alumni who might be doing different things with your participants, or your peer recovery or recovery support specialists who are helping people go to meetings or figuring those things out. Those are different things that you can include as well. One of the last things I want to talk about is the monitoring and evaluation. If your program has been in existence for 3+ longer years, it's time to hire an outside evaluator. You need to know if your program is operating according to the research, according to the best standards. You want somebody to come in and hold focus groups with your participants. Those who have been in your program, those who have been complete to you some information. If you don't have a database system, get a database system. So many systems that are out there. But I always want to encourage you, if you're looking at a local evaluation or doing an evaluation of your program, keep local, partner with a local college or university. Why? Because then you can build a relationship with that local college, that local university, to assist you in your community, ongoing, building that relationship for training, for further research, and make sure that they help you develop an exit interview for your participants to give you continued feedback on your program. So last but not least, what did the pandemic teach us? Some of those things that we want to consider. Do you need more Zoom licenses? WebEx? Do you need to upgrade your laptops, right? Laptops don't last forever. Do you need microphones? Because many of us are doing hybrid processes. Do we need cameras? Do we need headsets? Do we need to buy iPads so the clients can check in? They can do different things. Do you need headsets? Do you need standing desks? We learned a lot about where people may be working at home, doing some of these things, ergonomic chairs, all those different things can be written into your proposals. So don't forget that. These things have some budget implications. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do is find out the general cost, create a line item. Do not underestimate. If anything, overestimate. You know, there's no bad thing with you overestimate, but the one thing you don't want to do is underestimate, and you not have enough money. So make sure that you are out what you need to make this run. When you build it, make sure that you train other folks and build it where it can meet the needs of not just you, but your community as a whole. Thank you all.
Thanks, Carolyn. You were going out a little bit at the end there, but I think we could hear you well enough. We also wanted to remind you that next week, is that next week? Yeah. The BJA solicitation webinar for the Adult Treatment Court program is Wednesday, March 20th from 2:30 to 4. So that particular webinar will go through the solicitation specifically. You can register at our website, ntcrc.org/solicitations. You'll see it there. Lots of grant resources on that page as well. And so we really encourage you, if you are thinking about applying for the Adult Treatment Court solicitation, I really encourage you to join that. You'll get some of the details, you probably answer a lot of your questions that you may have. And speaking of questions, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen and let her we have some questions in the Q&A box. So she's been monitoring that. So we'll see what we have.
Great. Yes. So if you have questions, please feel free to type those in if you haven't done so already. Before we get started on the questions, we want to just remind folks that yes, the recording will be available, as will the slideshow. So we'll be sending that to you by email, probably tomorrow or the next day. Just depends on how long it takes for the video to render. And we'll also make that available on our website. So you'll be able to access it both places. But yes, you will have both the slideshow and the recording. You can listen back. So a couple of questions about MOUs. And so one question, can we use an MOU already created with our community partners, or is there a new MOU specifically to deal with the topic of the BJA funding? In our experience, an MOU, if that is a required document, you just want to make sure that it includes the current partners. So if you have one that includes everybody that will be involved in the project, you should be good to go. If that's not a document that you've updated in quite some time, it might be. And also on the MOU, you want to make sure that the roles and responsibilities and kind of what each partner is contributing, you want to make sure that that's current. So if all of that is in place, you should be good to go. Let's see, there was another one about the MOU. How recent do MOUs need to be? So again, as long as it's discussing all of your current partners and outlining the roles and responsibilities and how those community partners will contribute to the project, you should be good to go. If you need to add something in there, you would want to revise that. Can you provide additional information regarding a financial MOU?
I'm looking up that right now. So there's a fiscal agent memorandum of understanding signed by the applicant and the treatment court administrator. That's the specific requirement for the adult treatment court solicitation. And so I think that's just as it says, it's going to be that, for example, if the county is the actual fiscal agent, then the treatment court administrator and the county have an MOU that these two things are going to work together to fund the treatment court. So a lot of these don't have specific templates, the MOUs. I mean, so as Kristen said, you just want to make sure that it includes all of the information around who's doing it, the roles, who's the fiscal agent, and what's their responsibility related to that. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, feel free to post unupdated.
Yeah. Any idea when funding will be available specific to family treatment courts, aside from the SAMHSA one currently open?
I don't know. Carolyn, do you have any ideas? Oh, now you're gone completely, Carolyn. Ruh-roh.
There is a family treatment court solicitation that comes out annually out of OJJDP, so the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. We have not seen that one yet, so it might be that is released later in the spring. We will post that on our website, so ntcrc.org. And I know All Rise also sends out a blast to their listserv and their membership. You can also find that information on the ojjdp.gov website under grants, and then there's an open solicitations section. So there's a couple of places where once that solicitation is released, it will be available.
There's also JMHCP. There's some funding in that one for family courts, correct? Haven't we looked at that before?
Yeah, and JMHCP can also be used if you're a mental health court. So that's a funding stream specific to that, in addition to other kind of initiatives can be funded with JMHCP funding, but yes, that's a good one. Okay. Let's see. Do we also need a letter of support from our community partners we plan to contract services through?
Yes.
We recommend that you include letters of recommendation for all of the community partners or anybody who's going to be providing services to your target population. And within those letters of support, and sometimes even in the solicitation, there will be requirements for what needs to be included in those letters of support. So making sure it's very clear about the role that community service provider is going to play in this project. So if they're going to be providing services, what services are those? What is their experience in providing those services to the target population and the like? So we want it more to be more than just, we agree to partner with the program for this project, but really stating specifically roles and responsibilities.
And on page 33 of the current solicitation, it tells you exactly what Kristen just said about what has to be included. So description of the relationship, description of the need, benefits. So there's three sub, I guess, bullet points, if you want to say, that the letters of support need to include. So yeah.
Do I need judge, prosecutor, and defense attorney's resumes?
Looking that up for this particular one. So I guess advice is provide resumes of key personnel who will work on the proposed project. That's always a tough one because it's like, generally speaking, we usually say if they're in the budget as a key personnel. So if they're being paid from the grant, then you want to include their resume or vita. So I think that would be, if you wanted to include it, you certainly could. I don't think you would have to include it if they're not getting paid from the grant. So if they're not in the budget as key personnel, you wouldn't need to include it.
Right. And relatedly, pay attention to if it's asking for a job description and a resume, or a job description or a resume. So sometimes they want both, even though, maybe you have somebody on staff that you're going to move into a particular position, they would want the job description and the resume. If you don't have anybody currently on staff and you're going to be posting the position, then it would be the job description itself. So just really pay attention to the language in the solicitation about what they're looking for. This is a formatting question, double spaced, but charts can be single spaced.
In the BJA solicitation, the only thing it says about charts is that it can be that you can include them, and then it must be a legible font no smaller than 12 point. I want to say maybe in SAMHSA they can be single space, but don't quote me on that. So if we're just talking about the BJA, it looks like the only direction that's provided is that they can be included, and that they need to be a legible font no smaller than 12. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah. For the timeline, if we aren't sure when we will have training completed each year, would it be good to say we will deliver the training in Q4 of each year? I think one of the options, and we've used this on a couple of occasions, is if training is something that's going to be ongoing, ongoing is an option in the timeline. So if that's something that's going to be carried out across quarters or across years, that's something that you can indicate there if you're not sure of when that will be completed or specifically in what quarter those trainings occur. Is there a good website to find grants for reentry programs outside of treatment courts?
Yes.
COSUP, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
we can hear you.
COSUP grants is a good one. You can also use different SAMHSA funding, not just treatment court, but those are a couple that you can use for that, for reentry.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
For SAMHSA, it's the Adult Reentry Program, ARP, not AARP. Kristen and I actually work on one of those reentry grants. So if you have questions about reentry grants, that particular person, if you're still on, feel free to shoot us an email. That's grants that we write. So we can definitely send you in that direction of the COSUP and the ARP.
I see the list of examples of trainings or strategies and activities that can be funded with this solicitation. Is it appropriate for us to focus in on one or two main strategies like peer recovery support and case management, or is it preferable to include many different strategies?
This is Carolyn. I would suggest as many strategies as you can get in to meet the needs. So it's not held against you if you pick one or two. You just need to pick what you need to expand your program or to enhance your program and explain why.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
Can the BJA Adult Treatment Court fund mental health courts? It cannot, but I think there's another question in there.
Yeah.
Mental health courts, if you're on and you're interested in mental health court funding, the JMHCP, so Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, is a funding opportunity for you. And that is also available on our grants page as an open solicitation. So you can check that out there if you're interested in that. If we have not contracted out with an external evaluator, but have internal analysis completed by a court analyst, is this data that we can still reference in our problem statement?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's good. Again, you want to cite the source. You want to make sure that they realize, I mean, you will, but make sure that it's your program data. Make sure you have the time. So what years was that data from, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. There's another question about a webinar next week. So yes, that will be recorded. There will also be a frequently asked questions document that will be generated from that. So if you're not able to attend in real time on the 20th, that recording will be available on our website as well as BJA's website. So you will not lose out on that information. You also can submit questions ahead of time if there's a question that you want answered, and we compile all of those. And then during the Q&A, the folks from BJA will be able to answer those questions. Yeah. Is the grant application submitted through grants.gov only or through 2 sites?
2 sites. So this is a very important element of the new way grants run. And they'll talk about this extensively in the solicitation webinar next week, but we will say that there's 2 deadlines. You have a grants.gov deadline, and then you have a just grants. That's the system. So you have a just grants deadline as well. So you're going to submit particular information into grants.gov and particular information into just grants. So there are 2.
Yes. In general, do these grants allow for the purchase of incentives for participants? If not, does anyone have any ideas on ways to get this type of funding?
No, they do not cover the cost for incentives. If you're looking for incentives, you need to do community outreach in your community to get things donated. If you can't take donations, find out. Some courts have a 501c3, or their treatment agencies have a 501c3, or they partner with their police departments to get incentives. So there are other ways to get incentives, but the funds cannot be used for that.
Any suggested resources for case management system / database?
So there are tons of systems. What I recommend is if you have a state, to talk to local communities around you, to talk to your state drug court coordinator, to find out what is being used, what is out there. That is the best way to do it. If you're coming to the conference, I would tell you to go to the booths and see, but the best way is to check with local courts near you or around you.
Mhm.
This
And
is an
that is
eligibility. Go ahead,
That
sorry.
is simply because we cannot endorse one product over another.
Does the limitation on mental health courts apply to co-occurring courts as well for the BJA?
That's
good.
What was that question again?
Does the limitation on mental health courts apply to co-occurring courts as well? So our co-occurring disorder courts.
Co-occurring is an allowable under the treatment court funding. Mental health is not.
Yes. So co-occurring courts, you are eligible to apply. Does money for technology have to be specified in order to use grant funds for that?
Yeah, what technology are you planning to use it for? Because it's going to be a budget item. It's going to have to be clear of what it is being used for.
If you have a more specific question, but yeah, typically anything you put in the budget needs to be specified and justified. Maybe technology for case management. I'm not sure if that is.
Oh, for case management, yeah. Yes. Yes, you can use the money for a case management system for sure.
We're a small rural court that is just getting started. I'm the first to be hired as the coordinator. Are there any consulting or one-on-one options? I'm not sure if that question is related to grant writing or related to kind of overall court operations. So if you could clarify. Is there anywhere that we could find sample budgets?
I don't think we have any. You guys have any on your website, Carolyn? I don't think we do.
We do not.
So I'm assuming you mean sample budgets specific to recovery courts. Seems like we don't have that, but if you're just talking about kind of how to fill out the BJA workbook, I guess it is. They do have the OJP financial guide, which is somewhere on this page. Yeah, the DOJ grants financial guide. There are some examples in there of how to fill out a budget. So I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for, or if you're looking for specific to how to do one for recovery courts, but that's the closest we can get. Oh, both really, but for grant writing. That's from the individual that was looking for consulting or one-on-one.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Send us an email. Let's see. I don't even know my email today. linearc@uncw.edu or Duval. Kay, we're happy to help as best we can with grant writing for sure.
I know that each grant states who can apply. However, do you have a recommendation and or highest rate of application approvals when it's the court who applies directly, or a treatment provider or other justice partners such as a public defender's office or probation department?
I know we do not have that type of data.
I don't have it. We don't have any data, but it will state specifically if it needs to be a unit of local government, that would indicate, you know, like your county or your treatment court. Some grants are open to nonprofit or community provider organizations. So you just need to be clear about who is an eligible applicant for each solicitation. And really thinking about the capacity to manage the funds and the like. So kind of analyzing all of that in determining who would be the most appropriate applicant would be our suggestion. Peer support feels like an outlying area in grants in general. Does this grant support preventative during and or relapse prevention programs presented by lived experience peer support programs?
So the answer is maybe, yes. What it is that it's recommended that they're using a evidence-based modality for your relapse prevention. So whoever's trained in that could be someone with lived experience. You want to make sure that the person is trained in the modality that you're using, that they're implementing. You can actually write in for those individuals to get that training if they are not trained, and to pick a modality, to pay for that modality, and to pay for the folks to get trained in it. So the answer is sure.
Great. And just a reminder, we will be sending out both a copy of the recording and the slides to all attendees today. We'll also make the recording available on our website. And the same will be true for the March 20th solicitation webinar that will be facilitated by BJA. That recording will also be available, as well as a frequently asked questions document. Can BJA fund a county collaborative we are wanting to build between a number of different specialty courts? We are considering centralizing some administrative costs across the courts. Could BJA fund a person to do this work?
Yes. Yes. That can be done.
All right.
That is
Sorry
all the
to
questions we
Gone
have
over
at the
time,
moment.
but those are some great questions, everybody. We
Yes.
appreciate them.
Good.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. At the end here, you'll see some links to various resources related to grant writing, to some of the data sources and other resources that we mentioned throughout the presentation. So please take a look at those. And we wish you all the best in your grant writing endeavors.